So I hope you've all been enjoying the conference so far and the excellent sessions we have had. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our final speaker and session for this morning by introducing Dr. Laura David, who is not only a GP, but also the founder of Smart About Health, an organisation which delivers clinician-led, holistic, tailored health and wellbeing programmes for corporates. Laura has been a GP for 12 years and, as you can imagine, has treated patients from all backgrounds and ages. So she's drawn upon this extensive experience to set up Smart About Health, which she established about 3 years ago, and delivers these kind of programs for corporates, managers, and also their employees. Obviously, the pandemic has meant that businesses are increasingly aware about the need to address mental health at work. But I'm also delighted that obviously as a business owner, Laura obviously understands the demands that running a business puts upon mental well-being. And so she might also share those experiences with us this morning. So welcome, Laura. I am going to create a spotlight for you. So we will, lovely to see you. And I'm going to hand over to you. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Jo. And it's really, really great to be here, and also just to be thankful for the fact that Work Avenue has really been really helpful in helping me grow as a business. So I'm so glad that I can be part of this event. And obviously wellbeing is my world right now, but I don't have all the answers, but I'm really happy to take questions during this session. And thank you so much for the introduction. I think you summed it up really well on my behalf. So just to let people know that, of course, I'm a GP, but I'm also a mum, and going on this entrepreneurial journey has also been quite challenging for me. My well-being has also been challenged at many points along the way of becoming a doctor, navigating becoming a parent, and also owning and running a business. And I think that's really informed some of the aspects that we bring in our programs to corporates. And I'd really love today to be obviously around sort of the business side of things and the responsibility that has become quite apparent to businesses, but also about what you can do for your own well-being and how that translates to being well to work well, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like it to be interactive. I do have slides just to keep me on track, but please feel free to interrupt me, anyone who wants to ask a question, and we can get started from that perspective. So if you want to comment in the chat or just say hi, that's also completely fine. So being well to work well, what does that really mean? And I'm going to just start by sort of discussing what we would talk about today. So I think from the previous session, I caught the end of it, we've clearly seen a shift in well-being at work in the pandemic, and we do really need to be well to work well, and our health has perhaps become more of a priority. We've realized the fragility of life and our mortality, that we are all humans, and actually we're all going to have bumps in the road when it comes to our health and well-being. So in the beginning, I'd love to explore sort of what we mean by well-being and mental well-being. These sort of terminologies are interchanging quite a lot, and also look at some of the tools that we might need to, or components that we might need to draw upon to better our well-being if we can. And then looking at why it's relevant to employment, running a business, looking at the power of the pause, which is a bit of a story that I will share with you, and then looking at vulnerability, which is something that we started introducing with some of our clients, but it's a really sort of important piece that we are trying to harness for people in organizations. So what does well-being mean to you? I think this is a really important question, and I'd love to see if anyone wants to put in the chat anything about what it means, especially in the context of what you've been hearing this morning, because I think well-being is a really subjective state, and from a clinical perspective, the way that I see well-being, which I'm going to explain in the next slide, is really that constant state of flux that we may be feeling, everything's going amazingly, everything's going to plan, but actually sometimes, because we're all human beings, we're all going to have experiences which may take some of that well-being away. So what does well-being mean to you? Please put some comments in the chat, and I'll see what your thoughts are. I'll give you a few moments. Okay, balance, yes. And I think balance is a really big one since the pandemic, because everything has been blurred, work and life. Right now I'm working at home. Sometimes I'm working in my GP surgery, and prior to that, I had many years of working in a hospital. Lots of our clients are really struggling with work-life balance, but I think we've moved away from calling it work-life balance because the pandemic's made us realize it is just balance. So I like the way that you framed that. Okay, mind, body and emotional balance, sense of peace, contentment and achievement. I think that's really hit the nail on the head. Calmness and not letting negative emotions take priority. So poignant, and we are all human, so we will sometimes be invaded by negative thoughts and emotions. So how can we manage that so that they don't take over? And keeping perspective, absolutely. So thank you so much for everyone who's put those comments in the chat. And thinking about it from a sort of clinical perspective is where I come in. And something that I've been talking to clients about more recently is this constant state of flux that we are all in, because, as I keep saying it, and I will keep saying it, we are all only human beings, and there are many things that are outside of our control which we can't necessarily always factor in, which are going to upset that balance and feel like they're invading our well-being. So looking at this constant state of flux and looking at the World Health Organization and how they define mental health, which is often used interchangeably with this concept of well-being. But if you are feeling mentally well, then how does that interact with all the other components of good well-being? So our physical, emotional, social, occupational, environmental, and intellectual well-being, and also our spiritual well-being, these factors that play such a large part. So
Laura, just to interrupt you for 1 minute, you know that we can't see your slides.
Okay. Oh, you can't see them. Okay.
No, so you are co-host though, so you can definitely, or if you want me to, I can share them. No.
Okay.
There.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Can you see my full slide, Jo?
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, that's easier. So anyway, you didn't miss out on much because it was just a few introductions. So this is an important slide because it's about this constant state of flux that we're in. And the World Health Organization defines mental health as a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And they also say that well-being is a state in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities and can cope with the normal stresses of life, and can also work productively and are able to make a contribution to his or her community. So I think many of the things that people commented on really did encompass many of those aspects. So it's not merely the absence of ill health or disease, but as you can see, we can fluctuate, and mental illness, we also have to remember that if we have mental illness, we can also have good well-being if our mental illness, we feel it's under control and we're able to thrive and function in our environment. So people who have long-term chronic illnesses or long-term mental illnesses can still thrive and have good mental well-being. Mental health challenges in the middle is where I see a lot of things happening. Those could be social factors, environmental factors, COVID, that's really caused a lot of challenge for people, homeschooling, navigating working from home and relationships. I was having a chat to one of my clients the other day, and she was sort of saying, me and my husband are both working from home, and now we've run out of things to say to each other because we've just been in that environment for too long. So there's so many challenges that have come up for us. But there is a reality here as well, is that there is another pandemic going on as well as COVID. there is a mental health pandemic. And the Office of National Statistics did some data collection, and they have highlighted that 1 in 5 adults, so 21%, experienced some sort of depression in early 2021, between January and March. And this has actually almost doubled in the observations before the pandemic. So the knock-on effects of the pandemic have really influenced our well-being, and certainly mental health. And as a GP, I am seeing more patients coming to me, talking to me about their mental health. But that also perhaps reflects our slight shift in society, which I think I also picked this up from this last session, is that, are we more willing to speak about our mental health now? Has the pandemic humanized us to a state where we actually feel that we can talk about what's going on for us? And has it become more acceptable to say that we're having a mental health challenge, that maybe we're overwhelmed with stress or we're struggling with a bereavement? These things, they're all okay, but it takes time to change that culture. Okay, just interrupt me with any questions as well, Joe or Emma, if anything's coming through, because I'm really happy to take questions as we go along. Some of the data. So I think, well-being at work is becoming an absolutely huge area, and it's being invested in more and more from an employer perspective. And I think there is always that balance between what does the employers need and what does the individuals need, and sharing that responsibility for well-being is a really important part. Having that collaborative approach from an organizational perspective and from an individual perspective. But of course, as we spend so much of our time in work, there is a huge responsibility for employers to ensure that their staff members are well to work. But this isn't always going to be possible. We need to think of this in realistic terms. So there's been many business case studies out there, and one of them is particularly well known, which is from Deloitte, and they looked at the impact of poor mental health and how that impacts the employer in terms of money lost over a year. So they've outlined that poor mental health costs employers over £42 billion in the UK per year, and they broke that down into why they're losing money. So that's the concept of presenteeism, which may be something that is quite new to you. It's the concept that we're turning up at work, but we're not engaged because we're not well. And that's happened so much more in COVID because we've been working at home. How easy is it just to turn the laptop on and, even if we're not feeling well, just continue to work? And that then goes back to that balance issue of, what boundaries are you putting in place to ensure you can outline some balance, because if you're ill and you're turning up at work, you're not necessarily going to perform to your best abilities. And that's a contributor to employee burnout. But it also could be something more long-term that's going on, but I'm just using COVID as an example. And then you've got sort of leavism, so people leaving the business, turnover, and absenteeism, which absenteeism has always been quite a contentious issue, because from my perspective as a GP, we see, people can obviously self-certify for certain periods of time off. And if it's a longer period of time off and they do need sick notes, for example, the reason that's on the sick note might not always be the whole picture of what's going on. So it's a very hard area for employers to manage and to understand really what's going on with people's well-being or health and the reasons why they might take time off work. And this is just another interesting study from Deloitte looking at millennials and young people and Gen Zs. So we're talking typically people might be in their 20s, millennials maybe in their 30s. And actually, the pandemic's really hit young people very hard. I would consider myself to be a millennial, and I don't feel like I'm a young person, but in particular, the sort of Gen Zs have really had a difficult time because they may be starting roles and they're starting working from home. They're not necessarily getting that direct support and contact with the people that are going to influence their career and how they develop. So they looked Deloitte looked again at stress. They said that 41% of millennials and 46% of Gen Zs said they felt stressed or anxious most of the time. This is during the pandemic. And 49 and 47% of millennials and Gen Zs have taken time off work for mental health reasons and have given their employer a different reason for their absence. So it's really important that we sort of think about what's really going on for people. And I think then that comes down to what we talked about in the last session, is how are you having those conversations in a non-judgmental way in the workplace so that people can actually be supported. And that third space is a great example of that. So nearly 4 in 10 respondents didn't believe that their employers had taken action to support their mental well-being during the pandemic. So this is part of this epidemic of mental health challenges and illness that's going on at the same time as COVID. Is there any questions come through, Joe or Emma? Because I'm happy to take them. No, not yet.
Not so far, no. But so please, everybody, if you've got any questions, we're happy to take them throughout rather than waiting to the end. Don't be shy.
Exactly. So this is a bit more of an interactive component. So I think, we defined what does well-being mean to you at the beginning. It can mean a whole host of different things, and that state of mental well-being where you're feeling like you can contribute, you can feel like you can take on those stresses in life, is a really important sort of benchmark that we can use. But how do we really know what it is that we need to develop? So I just thought that we could actually look at some of the components in this sort of wheel of life, well-being wheel of life, that can actually impact our well-being. And we're not all going to be 100% in all these areas. So this is a well-being wheel, and it can be utilized in any way you want. So the components that I've put around the edges are just some of the standard components that come up, but they can be replaced with anything that's meaningful for you. And really happy if it's useful, Joe, we can send this on to people if they want to do it at home. So in looking at your well-being as if you're a vehicle, and as if, are you safe to drive, and is your wheel going to roll, looking at these areas? And of course there are going to be so many different components that will make this wheel uneven, and that's okay. I think we don't have to have perfection in every single one of these areas. If that's unrealistic, and we need to think about which areas do we want to work on. People are often setting sort of goals in January time, and they'll have mixed feelings about goals, because sometimes, depending on how you set those goals and what they are, you might not be able to realistically achieve them. So thinking about where your values lie in terms of potentially this wheel. So when we think of it as an MOT, we're thinking, are we safe to drive? Let's think about our mental and emotional health as an example. Do we feel particularly overwhelmed with stress at the moment? Are we finding that if we have a mental health issue, is that poorly controlled at the moment? Are we feeling like, we're not able to thrive? Going back to that definition of well-being, how would we rate each of these components out of 10? And that can really help you to start assessing, well, which one area, let's be realistic about it, is an area that I want to work on to see how can I improve it. And then if we want to set goals, we can think about trying to be realistic and making sure they're achievable and measurable if possible, and putting a timestamp on them if we can, to make sure that we're accountable to them. But is there anything that people want to comment on, either out loud or in the chat, that is something in this well-being wheel or something outside the wheel that can help them improve their well-being this year? Feel free to comment.
So I've got a question, Laura, that, obviously I think this is really helpful. And in fact, it's something that both Melanie and I do in our confidence workshop. But how would you say, if you can pick one of the, and maybe mental and emotional health is the one to pick for today, is, let's say you're on somewhere between a 4 and a 6, have you got, what kind of practical steps should you maybe take to get to to a 7, but up from a major or a minor up to kind of advisory? What practical steps could people take?
Yeah, so I think one thing is that it's all so individual, and when you're thinking about what steps you want to take, it has to be something that suits you. So one thing that I've learned a lot as being a GP is that when we're very prescriptive in our approaches, it doesn't always land as well as when you're almost working, we always try, but we're working in partnership with somebody to try and help them attain what they want to in their life. So somebody's mental and emotional health can be influenced by so many different factors. And actually, looking at the wheel, there is so much crossover. And I think you can kind of see how relationships, social, fun, creativity, and hobbies, for example, can really impact our mental and emotional health. And if you're isolated, for example, some people do thrive in isolation, and I think there's a big difference between isolation and loneliness. But if you're isolated and that has subsequently caused loneliness, then maybe for your mental and emotional health, you want to focus on putting some of the other aspects into your toolbox as well. So that could be having a conversation with a friend that perhaps you haven't spoken to for a long time, or going on a walk, which then may improve your physical health as well. So they're all overlapping, but it might also be on a more serious sort of level, if you're really finding that your mental and emotional health is scoring poorly, maybe in that 2 to 4 region, is that to think about what are the influencing factors here. And that can be really difficult, because a lot of the time when I ask patients, what do you think's brought this on, they often don't know. And I think that's okay. But if you can try and use this sort of concept of what we call introspection, which is looking within yourself to try and really understand your emotional well-being, what factors influence that. So it could be something like, something really personal. Okay, for me, for example, would be my emotional and mental well-being can suffer if I haven't had enough time to spend with my children. And of course, as somebody who's running a business, that's always going to be a struggle to get that balance. So if I think that that's a really strong value for me, spending time with family, and I can put some measures in place like, okay, look, my weekends, I'd like to protect my weekends, so I'm not working on them. Let's do a day trip. Let's do something, great that's going to help me relate to them and improve my mental and emotional health. Or it could be something like, I'm going to speak to a friend about how I'm feeling. I'm going to speak to a professional about how I'm feeling, and feel that that next step is something attainable and it's not too difficult. So you can actually move up the wheel and get into that sort of advisory, state if possible. I think, going from 2 to 4 to 7 to 8 might not be realistic in some places. So for some people, so actually thinking about what it means to you, what's the next step. I had a patient who was really, really suffering with claustrophobia, and it was hugely affecting her life. And some of the goal setting that we did together was, what does she want to do? Well, she really just wanted to step outside of her front door. That was the first step. These thinking about things in a sort of tiny habit approach. And then the next step for her was then to go for a walk down to the end of the road, and that was going to give her so much benefit in terms of her well-being.
I have had a question from somebody, from Ariel Chapman, who said that he'd be interested to know your thoughts on stress risk assessments, because he took time off last year due to stress and anxiety, and on returning found my employer doing a risk assessment really stressful and not particularly helpful. It felt like a tick box activity rather than a genuinely helpful tool.
Yeah, I think there are sort of, in some cases with employers, some arbitrary measures, and there's always, I think people always feel that there is a risk, as you use that word, in terms of disclosing to your employer that perhaps you are suffering with too much stress. I mean, stress to a degree is normal and it can help us with our performance, but actually when it's overwhelming and negatively impactful, then it can cause harm. And then so that the question about the risk assessment is, I think occupational health use lots of different tools to try and assess how they can support you. So I think if you're being reintegrated after a period of time off, or you've highlighted something to an employer and they want to use a tool, it's helpful for them to share the results with you so it doesn't feel too invasive, and to think of using that tool in a positive way to say, well, what adjustments might I need personally, or that my organization might need to help with, because ultimately they are trying to support people. And I think there is a fear that disclosing that you're struggling either physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is, it could be something completely out of your control, like a bereavement, but disclosing that it's having an impact on your day-to-day role at work, some people are scared that will stop people promoting them, or it might cause them to have a negative opinion on them or feel like they're not coping. And for me, it's also about changing the narrative around how we view well-being, and how there's sort of a concept that we call toxic positivity that we often see. I often see it in the big corporates that we work with, but that this infallible pedestal that leaders are often on. And coming back to a question I think that was asked in the previous session about leadership, is that everyone is human, we're all human. So if we can change the narrative and try and understand that everyone's going to have bumps in the road, then things like a stress risk assessment hopefully won't feel as daunting. And if the company is using it in the right way to help support you, then we can hopefully embrace some of these activities. But there is a lot of tick boxing that's going on still in organizations. Okay, so does anyone want to comment on any of the areas that they might think are important to them to start building? And sometimes it's nice to share any goals. I think yesterday we did a webinar on seasonal affective disorder, and we had lots of comments using this similar wheel with slightly different titles, but people were sort of saying, the importance of getting outside, going for a walk at lunchtime, in the workplace. How can people start making some tweaks to their lifestyle that's going to benefit their well-being? So if anyone wants to put anything in the chat, we can.
Does anybody want to share a story or a comment about their wellbeing MOT? Please put your hand up. Anybody? Shulamit, is that you? Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, actually, why not? Absolutely. I'm actually out on a walk now.
Ah,
great.
So I just thought I'll share. Literally, yeah. I mean, I do work from home, so it's important for me to get that break. So even if I have to conduct a meeting on Zoom while I'm walking through the park, I can always sit down on a bench if I have to and take notes. But I do start every morning with a 20-minute meditation and breathing meditation. That sets me off for the day. So I thought I'll share that meditation is literally key for me. And if anybody is not sure how to do meditation, I'm more than happy if they want to reach out to me and show them how to do it after the session. So it's really, really important. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I think, so I think it's really important about finding your thing. Like it's about your meditation, but meditation is not necessarily in everybody's toolbox. So what can it be that is going to help you to find a way to relax? Of course, that's really important, and perhaps even take you to a spiritual level or improve your mental and emotional health, which there is a lot of evidence that meditation, mindfulness and various other interventions can improve your mental well-being. Somebody's also put here about journaling and gratitude. Gratitude is such an amazing practice which really helps to reframe things for people. And I think there was a question before about negative thoughts, it can really help you to manage some of those negative thoughts if you reframe things slightly.
Miriam has asked whether you could actually just show her, maybe annotate how you complete the wellbeing wheel.
Okay, let me see if I can do that.
Or you don't need to annotate, but maybe with your
okay, so I think so looking at, if I was to say, my mental and emotional health was pretty not great at the moment, I might fill in up to here, color it in. If you see the bottom right hand corner, that also shows you how you might shade it in. And then, like, let's say, you know, you're very happy with your spirituality, you might shade all this area in. And relationships, let's say, you know, relationships have been difficult in the pandemic. I think that's a reality for a lot of people. So working on what it means for you to improve your relationship, if that's an area that you feel needs some work, then you can shade them at different levels, and then actually you can see using the wheel which areas might be the ones you want to work on first, if that makes sense. I hope that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, my annotation skills are not very good. Okay. All right. I'm happy.
Don't forget to clear your drawings.
Yes. Okay. Oh yes. How do I do that?
If you go to annotate, it'll say clear drawings.
Here we go. Okay. So really interesting, and I suppose also comes down to the comment about meditation and mindfulness, is that there's been research into what makes us happy and what can contribute to our general well-being. So this is a research from the Happiness Research Institute, and this is an independent research body looking at why some societies are happier than others. Now, of course, the pandemic's been a big factor in that, and this research took place during the early part of the pandemic. And the basic message is that there are certain things that we can do that there's evidence for that can really make an impact on our well-being. The three things that they outlined were being outside for more than 15 minutes each day, and part of that obviously relates to being in the sun. Even if it's a cloudy day, we can still get positive feedback from the sun. If it's being in nature, that can also help, because there is a lot of other research that's gone into how we relate to nature and the benefit to our mental well-being. And they also, also it can contribute to our physical well-being if we're going for a walk, or we're going for a run, or we're just challenging ourselves. And the other part of that for me that I see is that it's a great way to break up the day. So if we are working from home, and perhaps we were working in an office before, or even if we've always worked from home, that getting outside for 15 minutes can help you recreate that balance a little bit more, because you're actually just separating, going down to breakfast, then opening your laptop. You actually need to separate work and life a little bit, so that you can sense that there's not a complete overlap between the two. Other things that are really interesting are engaging in arts and crafts, so tapping into that creativity, fun, hobbies, that part of the wheel. There is good evidence to suggest that engaging in arts and crafts has positive impact on our mental well-being. And talking about hobbies as well, there's other studies that have looked at, for example, singing choirs, which can also impact, from a social perspective. There's a lot of serotonin that's released when we sing. But, if you don't want to join a choir, or you're not good at singing like me, my husband will admit that that's probably not my next step. But singing in the shower could be, the first place that you start to explore that. And meditation. So there is good evidence that meditation can help us with our mental well-being. Okay. There's some questions coming through, Joe, but shall I just do the next slide and then we could take some more questions?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so I'm just going to try and bring it back to the topic now, which is really about being well to work well. And when we work with clients, we really try and focus on what can the organization do, and there is a significant responsibility from an employer perspective, and that could be because you own a small business, or it could be because you're part of, you're a small cog in a big company where there's a huge movement now towards ensuring employee well-being is really high on the agenda. But it's also really important that as an individual, you're demonstrating how you maintain your well-being when you consider applying for a new job or looking for a new role. How are you putting yourself out there, and how are you making sure that this is something that you can demonstrate? Because you know, the part in your CV where we used to write hobbies, you know, that and then you'd say, for me, it was always, you know, I enjoy going to the gym, and I enjoy spending time with my family. And then later on, because I'm really quite into weightlifting, you know, I would put something about, you know, how much weights I like to lift. But actually, you know, this is a really important part. It's almost like a new part of the CV that we need to include, which is, this is how I actively and proactively make steps to improving my well-being and making sure that I can thrive, and as we said, you know, contribute to the workplace, contribute to society, and feel like we can deal with the stresses that are put upon us. So how can you demonstrate, you know, how you're looking after your well-being? This is an important part. Don't feel shy to not mention it. You know, if you're speaking to a prospective you know, new job, if you're in an interview or you're having that discussion, it's a really great way to obviously create some conversation, but also thinking about that you're going to be able to thrive because you've got things in place that you can work with. And then
we have actually had a question from Mimi, which kind of relates to this.
Yeah.
Is, do you have any advice about workload? I've noticed that for some employees, this has increased vastly over the pandemic, and employees don't know how to respond to this, especially maybe with a fear of job loss or lack of promotion.
Yeah, it is a hard one. And I think, you know, because of the way that things have become very blurred and the ease that we have access to, for example, technology now. So, you know, before perhaps we'd be working in the office on a desktop, and we wouldn't, I mean, I didn't get a laptop until the pandemic from my GP practice. You know, everything was right. I'm going to finish, I'm going to shut the computer down, and I'm going to leave, and I can't just log onto my emails at 10 p.m. or, you know, if I see something coming in, I feel the urgency to respond to it. So with workload, it's really again about that marriage between what is the what's coming from the team and the organization, what's the expectation, and then what's the personal urgency. And it's almost, you know, that we have to set boundaries within ourselves as well, to say, well, you know what, if an email comes in at 10 p.m, I'm not going to respond to it till the next day. Or, you know, do something even more proactive and say, I'm going to turn off my email notifications after a certain time. And I think it all also relates to what you're used to. So in the beginning, when we were starting to work with clients, this was, you know, always the issue was that everything had suddenly become blurred, and, you know, people working at home to, you know, 11 p.m. at night, responding to emails, or just opening the laptop, doing a little bit more work because they were feeling like they were able to do that. It was just so easy to do it, and perhaps there was more demand in terms of workload. So I think it's about setting personal boundaries, and not to be afraid to set those boundaries and be vocal about them, because, you know, generally you would hope that somebody's going to respect you more if you're able to say, look, I have a family, or I like going to the gym after work, and, you know, I'm going to leave at this time, and I'm not going to be available to answer emails until whatever time it is the next day. Or if you work flexibly, you might say, you know, you're happy to respond between certain hours of the day. And if it's workload, it could also be a team issue, as in there's not a realistic cohesion within the team to make sure that the workload's either being distributed evenly, or there is a realistic workload being set. And I think these conversations also need to take place within the team, and some of them may go back to that technology overwhelm. It's the fact that we've got the laptops, we've got the chats going, we've got Microsoft Teams, and we've got our emails all on. And actually, what can we do to safeguard our well-being by putting measures in place which can actually protect some of those boundaries?
Thank you, that's fantastic.
Okay, so look, that also pertains to this area about, are you burning out? As an individual, somebody who's looking for work, what measures are you taking place? That can be something that you go into a job and say, look, I can set these boundaries in place and that will help me continue to be productive long term in my job rather than burning out. And burnout's been a huge issue, in particular in the pandemic, but it's not exclusive. It's but it's become more complicated due to all the other factors. So just one other point here is about how organizations might be using wellbeing to recruit, and lots of our clients are actually sort of, you know, attracting new potential candidates with the efforts that they're doing in the wellbeing space. So really becoming an employer who's focusing on wellbeing, who is able to be non-judgmental and be able to allow people to talk about their well-being freely in the workplace without them having fear of repercussions, but also what steps have you put in place to support employee well-being. So I think something came up in the last talk about employee assistance programs. There are certain sort of reactive measures that employers can put in place to make sure that there are systems to help people if they're struggling, and make sure that people utilize them. And then other things, like you said before, Emma was talking about mental health first aiders, thinking about the culture in the organization. What are you promoting? Are you promoting mental health as being something that everybody in the organization can lean into and talk about without the fear of being judged or being sort of harmed in any way? Okay, so I'm just going to go through something really quickly, and this is something that may stick with people, and then really happy to take questions. I will talk briefly about vulnerability and how that can be leveraged in sort of wellbeing conversations. But the power of the pause is something that maybe pertains to that balance, but also to what we can do if we're not always on. And it's something that we've noticed with our clients, that people are saying, look, we're always on, we feel like we can never switch off. But actually what happens to people when they never switch off is that they become less creative. And if you're not giving yourself those natural pauses during your working day, or during other tasks that you're doing, then you become less creative, less productive, and this can also lead to some of the features of burnout, like cynicism. And the power of the pause is really something that I leverage from when I was in a very junior position as a doctor. My first year as a doctor, I was in an operation with a consultant surgeon, and of course, being a bright-eyed, wide-eyed new doctor, I didn't really know what leadership looked like in this sense. So I was the only doctor assisting the surgeon in an operation that was all going quite wrong, and the patient was bleeding a lot, and there was everything was taking a lot longer than anticipated, and the tension in the room was really palpable, and we could feel that no new ideas were coming to the table, literally the table, and being we were able to find a solution to stop this patient's critical state. So so the surgeon did something that I'd never seen before, but it's always stuck with me. He said, look, we've been doing this operation for 2.5 hours. I'm really exhausted. I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna leave the room, and I'm just going to go and refresh myself. So I thought, okay, what you're leaving me with this patient. But actually, obviously, everything was stable at that stage. So he left, and he left for about 15 minutes, and he went off, and he had a shower, and he changed his clothes, and he had a coffee, and he came back to the table, to the patient, and he refreshed his mind, and he knew what to do to save this man's life, and he did. And that really stuck with me as something that it's so important that we do take breaks, even if they are in these critical moments, and that we factor in that pausing at the right moments. And that might be to go off and do mindfulness or meditation or change of scenery, get outside, do some walking. All of these small steps will help us in our journey, but they also help us to role model to the people around us who may be too afraid to, put those boundaries in place at the stage of their career, but they can see that the leadership is there to show them it's not all about go 100%. There are definitely other ways that you can safeguard your mental well-being, and that can also have a positive knock-on effect.
Really lovely idea, thank you.
All right, so last little bit really for me is about something that was spoken about, I think, in the previous session, is about the interaction between leaders, managers, and their staff. And there's been a lot of research into how managers can be moved from boss to coach. There's a big research institute called Gallup who do a lot of research into well-being at work. And this is just one of the findings of many of their surveys, which was looking at when managers add well-being conversations to their management practice, it has a positive spillover effect into other aspects of work. And in more detail, one study, which was a large study, showed that where organizations perceived, where employees perceived their health and well-being to be well managed, organizational performance was more than 2.5 times greater than for those employees where they rated their well-being as being poorly managed. So I think this kind of really sets the scene that actually this narrative of having well-being conversations, being a bit more open about what's going on for ourselves, and having, if you're in a position of management, having that curiosity to have the conversations, making sure that there isn't judgment going to take place. It's actually going to be a productive conversation. Doesn't have to be, we're going to have a well-being conversation now. It can be that third space, that going for a walk, going for a coffee, using your good old friend, the mobile phone, rather than having a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, and having an open conversation about what's going on for you. Is there things going on that you might need support with? How can I make that happen as somebody who's in a position of responsibility? So making mental health conversations the norm. So mental health, but it could be physical health, it could be anything that's going on. And vulnerability, I will just reframe that a little bit, because I'm sure many of you have heard of the amazing Dr. Brené Brown, who is a researcher in America. She's also a well-versed TEDx speaker and is by trade a social worker. So she's really looked at into many of the social factors that allow human interconnection. So she talks about vulnerability, and if we can add vulnerability into our conversations, and we talk about well-being, we're going to be able to connect with people on a much more authentic level. And it doesn't mean that you have to share your whole story or you have to break down crying. That's not necessarily what vulnerability means. So looking again at vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness, we need to reframe this and use it in our conversations about well-being. So vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not a weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. She talks extensively about vulnerability, and she also says, one of her many quotes is that vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. So, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about what vulnerability might mean to you. But for me, it's also quite simply about just listening. And I think we spoke about that in the last session, but actually actively, empathetically listening to somebody else and giving them the time and space to share, and using our body language, using all the reaffirmations that we can do when we're in a conversation. If it's on the phone, just giving them space and allowing time to pause as well can really help to drive that conversation. And if you do have a story or you do have something that you can share that doesn't detract from that person's individual conversation, then it's okay to share something that, it's okay to share how you're feeling or how that made you feel. These are all parts of how we can connect with each other and have better conversations about well-being. So that's it from me. I can see there's some questions, Joe. So I've just put my contact details here. If anyone wanted to contact me, I'll leave this slide out for a moment, and happy to go through any of the questions.
Thank you. Do you want to go off stop share so we can see you?
Do that.
And then I shall also spotlight you. Actually, I'll view the, sorry. Lovely. Thank you, Laura. That was excellent. I've got a question from a business owner, Emma, she's a holistic therapist trainer and a yoga teacher, and obviously her business has taken quite a hit over the last 2 years because, you know, normally she would work in person, and she'd love to share her knowledge and expertise in a market that could benefit. Do you have any suggestions how she could go about sharing what she does in the corporate world? Obviously, by the way, Emma, you know that myself and Kim are more than happy to discuss this as a route forward in your business advice meeting. So I will add that, but I don't know if, given you working in that sector, Laura, what your thoughts are.
As I said in the beginning, you know, Work Avenues really helped me as well, and always the sound advice from Joanna herself. I've been privileged to have that. But I think in terms of the corporate sector, I mean, it is an emerging priority for workplaces. And, you know, one is that I use LinkedIn a lot. LinkedIn has been a really important platform in terms of social media. I mean, some people don't call it social media, LinkedIn, but it's definitely a great networking platform. I think if you can do anything to leverage your network to try and get introductions within the corporate sector, even running, you know, very sort of free classes, perhaps going into a workplace, getting them interested, or doing something online, and getting known to them as a quality provider will really help you.
I'm just putting my business hat on again. Sorry for the employment team. So employment team, please do feel free. But, you know, obviously, when you're in work, you know, when you're in work, working for an organization, it's obviously easier to reach out to your colleagues, or maybe to reach out to managers, providing that they're all very open. But when you're running your own business, you know, have you got any kind of practical steps to give people here, you know, as to how to look after their own well-being when you're having to wear all of the different hats, and you're just working on your own? You don't maybe have other colleagues. I have, after you've given your answer, I am actually going to mention one thing that we're about to do in May, but I'll let you answer first, Laura.
And I think it is so important that you pace yourself in a way that's going to be sustainable. And, you know, burnout is not just an employee phenomenon. It is a business, it's an entrepreneur phenomenon, it's a business owner's phenomenon. And it, you know, looking at leadership, it's also a leader's phenomenon. It's everyone is human, and nobody is immune to challenges along the way. So you need to factor that in and give yourself the road to longevity. When it's your own business, you need to, absolutely prioritize your health. And you can go back to that wheel, for example, and you can say, well, which areas are the most important to me? And as I said, you know, the little titles are not exclusive. You can add in whatever is so important to you to make sure that you have that additional meaning to your life. And I think the other thing is that it's about self-compassion. One thing that always comes up, whether you're a manager, whether you're a business owner, or whether you're an individual who's looking to improve self-compassion, is that you can't pour from an empty cup. So how are you going to fill your cup up so that you can actually have the energy and the productivity to go away and, you know, make sure that either people in your team, or if it's just you, like, you know, you're giving yourself enough time and space to make this a reality? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs fall down, and, you know, I'm not going to say that I'm perfect in any way. I really have struggled with my well-being many times, and they might fall down because they actually just, you know, burn themselves out and cannot carry on. And that's a reality, is that if you get yourself into that state where, you know, there's going to be a big lull in your productivity because of burnout, and you've got to recover from it, that the reality is that your business may not survive or thrive, and the uphill climb after that journey is going to be harder than if you pace yourself and find the tools that you can leverage to make sure that that's a reality. And for me, it's definitely things like exercise. But, you know, I'd love to set myself a goal that I could go to the gym 5 times a week, and I know I would feel amazing for it, and I know my body would change, and that, you know, I'd maybe be able to do what I used to be able to do. But actually, it's not a reality for me to be able to do that with all my hats on and with my kids and everything. So that self-compassion is what is something realistic for you. If I go to the gym once or twice a week, I have to feel happy that I've achieved something, and that's going to make me feel good as well.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And also, actually, I would like to just mention that obviously, you know, talk to Kim and I if you've got your own business, just from a business perspective, or if you're looking for a job, obviously set up an appointment with one of the employment team, because we are here to talk to and discuss issues. So as the rabbi said in the last session, you know, the key is taking that critical first step and reaching out for help. And one plan that we've got going forward is that in May, where the business team are planning to launch a kind of a peer-to-peer board, as it were, or kind of, you know, to have a group each month where if you've got a business issue, you can come and talk to people and talk about that specific business issue, so you feel that you've got other people to reach out to. And watch this space for more information about that. Does anybody have any other questions? We've got maybe time for one more question before we finish off.
I have been given one final question. If there's just time for Dr. David. And it's actually sort of an interesting juxtaposition, obviously, with your excellent work on wellbeing, but also the fact that you are a GP as well. And, you know, the first port of call that many people are advised to take, that first step, is see your GP, make an appointment to see your GP. But at the same time, we hear in the media and we hear from each other, it's sort of I think that, you know, GPs are terribly busy, and we kind of then put ourselves in the state of mind that says, oh, you know, the GP, my issues don't matter, you know, it's not that important. There are other people who are much more deserving of the GP's time than me. And so we sort of prevaricate a bit. What would you say to people who harbour those thoughts?
That's right. I mean, you know, it's been such a big thing over the pandemic, and the first thing I would say is that, you know, GP services are completely open. There's no change, you know, no restriction in the number of patients that we can see compared to pre-pandemic. There are plenty of face-to-face options if that's what's required. I have seen many patients who have put off coming to see me or coming to see their GP with a whole range of issues, not just mental health issues, because they felt, for many reasons, either they may feel scared of seeing a doctor. In the height of the pandemic, really, that was a large consideration, that people didn't want to go out or to see somebody where they might be exposed. But now it's more of a, you know, it's difficult to see a GP potentially, or I feel that my issues might not matter as much as some other people's. Some people often caveat that when they pick up the phone to them, they say, you know, I'm sure you've got many other, you know, more important issues coming. And, you know, it's actually, it's not the case. You know, any issue that's bothering you should be discussed. You know, if you feel that you need to speak to a professional, can be discussed with your GP. We have, you know, all the capabilities and capacity to do so. I had a lady, you know, very distressing to see that she had left a breast lump for a number of months without coming to see me. And, you know, I said to her, why didn't you come? And she said, well, you know, I thought it would just go away. But the reality was, you know, when you probe a bit further, that actually, you know, she had lost someone close to her, and that had put her off, because people may feel that they don't want to hear the reality. So there's many reasons why people don't come in general anyway to see their doctor, or may feel that there's a barrier. But to reiterate that, you know, GPs are here and ready and waiting to see you, and anything that's bothering you that you want to discuss with your GP, you know, the appointment can definitely take place.
Thank you,
Laura. Thank you so very much. That, you know, first of all, the research that you shared, and obviously your input from as a business owner, and obviously your experience from a GP, was just fascinating and really excellent. Thank you so much. We are going to share the slides from Laura's presentation as well as everybody else's, so we would encourage you to fill in your well-being wheel, and also to remember the power of the pause. So definitely after this event, we would recommend that you take a pause and go and step outside or have a cup of coffee. Laura, thank you very much. I know you're really busy and we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Please, everybody now stay on the session, because we are going to have some reflections, not only from ourselves, but also from 3 businesses that myself and Kim work with. So please stay on the session, and I am going to start highlighting. Well, first of all, we are going to highlight, as I say, 3 businesses, and I'm going to highlight Sarit first of all. So I will spotlight her, and you will hear 2 minutes from 3 of our businesses that we work with. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Sarit Gaffan, who runs she will talk about it, but she runs a kind co-working project, which is a really lovely way to think about things. So Sarit, over to you.
Thank you, Jo. So hi, I'm Sarit of Highest Good Wellbeing. I'm a survivor of depression, and I've learned that maintaining well-being cannot happen with at least a basic level of self-awareness. It starts with simply asking yourself how you are. We're great at asking others that question, but how often do you check in with yourself? I developed the following technique when I had COVID in March 2020, and I invite you to join me briefly in giving it a go, or just observe if you prefer. It's called a self-care check-in, and it's a quick way of measuring where you are on the well-being scale. So if you'd like to give yourself a moment to pause, just like Dr. David suggested earlier, breathe, and if you like, close your eyes, and see if just for the next few seconds, you can let go of any thoughts except this one. How do I feel on a scale of 0 to 10? And if you find yourself lower down the scale than you'd like, the next step is to acknowledge that you're feeling low and ask yourself this with kindness. What do I need to do to move myself up the scale by 1 point? And if your eyes are still closed, please open them. So that was just a short version demonstrating the kind of technique I offer as part of my Kind co-working platform, which I started with mental health charity Jamie in 2019. It's a free online co-working space that tackles the challenges of working or job seeking in isolation, with a focus on kindness as a key element of mental well-being. It includes optional check-ins and timed work segments, with kind reminders to take care of your well-being in between each segment. I also offer a professional version to entrepreneurs and organisations, with the option of more well-being content, such as bite-sized workshops and positive focus exercises. Please connect with me if you have any questions, or to register your interest in the professional Kind co-working tasters I'm offering next week. Links to my website and the project are in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarit. That was fantastic. Much appreciated. I'm now going to hand over to Zahava Handler, lovely to see you, who is a psychotherapist and runs an organisation called Insomnia Healing. So Zahava, the timer is on. We are being strict about this 2 minutes, but welcome to you.
Hi, thanks. My name is Zahava Handler. I'm here to talk about sleep difficulties and improving your sleep. So just some statistics. About 36% of adults in the UK say that they sometimes struggle with sleep about once a week, and almost 1 in 5 struggle every single night. COVID has made that problem much, much worse, and it's estimated to cost the UK economy about £40 billion. lack of sleep, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up during the night, or too early in the morning. These are all symptoms that you might recognize or have heard about. It could be affecting you, a member of your family, or an employee. It affects well-being, quality of life, and work output. And studies have shown that if we treat this lack of sleep, which we call insomnia, then other mental health conditions can improve too. I myself suffered for 25 years with insomnia, and I tried everything. Eventually, I discovered a method to solve my sleep problems without medicine or other outside aids. And that has been clinically proven to solve insomnia. So NICE, who tell the NHS which treatments to use, the European Union's version, the American Psychiatric Association, and all others, they've all said that CBTI is the first line of treatment for insomnia. It's so good that I actually changed career paths. I used to work in travel, and I retrained as a psychotherapist. I specialize in sleep, and I trained as a CBTI practitioner. So CBTI is CBT for insomnia. We understand how the mind and the body works. We learn how sleep and insomnia work. And what we do is we put this knowledge together to create behavioral changes around bedtime habits. We recreate sleep patterns for you. And I combine this work together with my work as a therapist. So it could change your life as it changed mine. And you can find out more about me and more about my work at insomniahealing.com. My name is Zahava Handler. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Zahava. That was great. I really appreciate it. And I'm now going to hand over to our final, and I had her here, Karen Taylor. Here we are. Karen, lovely to have you with us. And Karen runs a oils business, and I'm going to hand over to her to explain more about it and start the 2 minutes. Thank you, Karen. You're on mute, Karen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My business is Pause for Oils and Pause for Massage. So just give a thought at a time where you might be suffering from lack of sleep, stress, low energy, aches, pains, pregnancy-related tiredness, or compromised immune system, and menopause symptoms such as hot flushes or mood swings. So just take a few seconds to think if anything has come up for you in your life or recently. I provide massage and essential oil blends for all stages of life, and more recently specializing in the menopause, which I felt there was a real need for. With over 25 years of experience of using oils and massage with my mums and babies, I can now help to ease the symptoms of menopause, sleeplessness, and general aches and pains. My background is nursing and midwifery, and during my time in these roles, I've also developed an interest and passion for the healing powers of oils and massage. And I have been known after a 12-hour shift to come home, have a shower, bath, and just cover myself in essential oils, and it really helps to take a lot of the stress away from the day, particularly during COVID, which has been longer hours, wearing a mask all day. So the oils have been amazing. And I even got my colleagues to put a little bit of essential oil on the brim of their mask to help with their breathing for some of them. So an appointment with me starts with a consultation to find out the individual needs of each client. And the massage and oils are tailor-made especially for that client's needs. Clients have reported feeling more energized, sleeping better, and reduced menopause symptoms as a result of my treatment. I welcome you to get in touch and see if I can help ease these symptoms we just mentioned. For any more information, please message me on my website is pauseforoils.co.uk.
You add that to the chat, Karen. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really, thank you very much to Zahava, to Sarit, to Karen. It was lovely to have some of the business owners that we work with here on our Wellbeing conference. We appreciate you being here today. And now Emma and I are going to take, along with the Work Avenue team, I'm going to kind of put us all on gallery, and we're here to answer any other questions that you've got. So please, if you've got any questions, do ask us. Thank you. Any questions that we might have, or that you might have? I'm going to add Emma in here. Everybody's being just saying nice things to us, Emma, so maybe we should just leave it here. I don't know if you've got anything from a work perspective.
I hope this morning has given everyone a little pause for reflection. You know, undoubtedly, you know, every wonderful talk we've had this morning has been really, really different from each and every other talk, but common themes have run through them all. You know, the themes of a little bit of self-care, a little bit of self-compassion, pause for reflection, think about yourself and think about others, you know, and an awful lot of, I don't know, embracing, putting our arms around ourselves and each other has come through this morning. We chose this week to hold our Wellbeing at Work event, and it's no accident that we did. It's this part of January is known to be a very depressing and gloomy time of year for all sorts of reasons. It seemed apt that we should run our event now. So we really, really hope that our sessions this morning, and our three very diverse, but all three of them terribly eloquent and so easy to listen to speakers, together with our three wonderful businesses at the end, have provided us all with just that pause for reflection, and also that little bit of uplift as well, little bit of uplift and a little bit of inspiration. You know, the narrative about mental well-being started before the pandemic, but it really ramped up during the pandemic for all sorts of reasons that we all understand so well. And I feel that it's ramped up now to such an extent that I don't believe that when the pandemic starts hopefully to diminish in our minds as not being the important factor that it is. And in fact, there was a headline as we've been on this morning about how certain restrictions are now going to be lifted for good and all the rest of it. But I hope the narrative, the conversation and the priority of our mental well-being continues with just the same level of importance that it has all the way through. And that applies whether you are in work, whether you are looking for work, whether you are freelancing, whether you are looking to start your own business, whether you already do run your own business. It matters not. So the same narrative is so important. Jo mentioned some of the events that she's going to be hosting for the business team, and for our job seeking community alike. We also have so much to inspire, to motivate, and I hope we can in our own way put our arms around you a little bit. Exactly. I'll remind you again, I mentioned it earlier, but perhaps not everyone was on the call. 17th of February, my colleague Jo, who is smiling at you now, my other colleague Melanie, who I'm sure is smiling even though she's not on the screen, will be running our Building Your Confidence workshop. And it's a really, as if by magic, there she is. Amazing what Zoom can do. Our Building Your Confidence workshop is a wonderfully inspiring and mutually supportive space for people to start their thinking in this field and start taking some small, realistic steps that allow people to take steps to succeed, not to fail. And little by little, we can all start to improve where we are now to building ourselves to be in a better place. The calendar, the clock at the top of my laptop says that we have a couple of minutes, no, 1 minute left. If anyone has any final questions, people have been putting lovely thoughts and comments in the chats, but don't forget that if you have a question, there's probably about 30 seconds for us to address it. And believe me, we will do just that in the 30 seconds that we have available to us. And if we don't, you know, it sounds corny, but it's true. But really, truly, it's been great this morning. You have been great. We hope our events are firstly well attended, and secondly much enjoyed by people. We really, really hope that to be the case. We will continue to offer such events and offer new ones. We will be asking all of you for your feedback. So thank you in advance for taking the time to help us with that. All sessions will be available, so don't worry about that. And also the video slides, the PowerPoint slides as well. Thank you all. You know exactly where to find any member of the Work Avenue team. Our website has our email addresses, you know the phone number. I hope the rest of your day is a good one. And thank you again for joining us.
Lovely to see you all. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.